Hi, good afternoon or good morning. This is Mrs. Gentry. I teach U.S. History, grade 11. This video here is just to recap a little bit about our last lesson, the ending of World War II, and also just to give absent students an idea of what we did at the end of that lesson, and also give absent students directions for what to do to make up for those points. Okay, so we are going just to recap a little bit of our last lesson about World War II. We're going to note first what we've been talking about a lot is the different theaters the U.S. was involved in. First one being the European theater, with the U.S. in the beginning of the war only being involved by supplying ammunition and other supplies, and then more directly getting involved at the end of the war. And then the surrendering of the Nazis in 1945, having the end of the European theater. But again, this is a U.S. history class, so we are going to talk more about the direct involvement of the U.S. in the Pacific theater. We're just going to go over a couple of the points that happened close to the end that are going to lead up to our debate. So the first one of these is the surrender of the Philippines. The Americas gave up the Philippines to Japan in 1942. This sparked fear into a lot of Americans for the sheer fact that the Philippines had been a colony for a while now, and that that Japan was making headway into territory. Another fact is island hopping and how America would gain territory as they hopped to each island, and how that was a successful mission. Another thing that we talked about is a couple battles, one of them being the Battle of Iwo Jima in February to March of 1945, and how that famous image of Joe Rosenthal, the one with all the soldiers carrying that flag, how that also sparked Americans' opinions towards the Pacific theater. Another important thing at the end of the war was the inauguration of Harry S. Truman after the death of FDR in 1945. One thing that is really important too is the internment camps in the home front, how Americans reacted to Japanese Americans, putting 100,000 Japanese Americans and relocating them into different separate areas, and how they would lose property and certain liberties too. So one thing that is important to our debate that happened is the Manhattan Project. This Manhattan Project was a secret scientific project that was geared towards making nuclear weapons before the Nazis could. We had different scientists like Albert Einstein leading this with Dr. Robert Oppenheimer in Los Alamos, New Mexico. This project had about $2 billion with 125,000 people working all over the United States, from mining the uranium or plutonium to creating the inner workings of the bomb and other things like that. One important part that we're going to talk about is the Trinity test in July of 1945. This Trinity test was one of the first tests of the atomic bomb. It solidified the use of plutonium and the concept of implosion in the bomb's inner workings. Truman knew this test had happened and how successful it was when he went to the Potsdam conference. And knowing this information, he made a declaration to Japan to surrender under prompt and utter destruction if they don't. He also knew that there was multiple different atomic weapons that they could use, and kind of gave them a power trip over this area. So now that we know more about this, we are going to go over more of what you missed during our class. We are now going to go over what you missed during our class session. We were discussing in greater detail the end of World War II. We started our class by answering an essential question like we do every class. Our question today was, is it ethical to end the lives of thousands of innocent civilians to end a war? Okay. We had students just write it on a half paper, only a couple sentences and then turn it in. After that, we did a Kahoot to review our last lesson talking about America's influence in the war. And then after that, we had about 6 minutes to jot down some notes about who, where, why, and how the atomic bombs were built. After we took that time just to individually think about it, we discussed it as a group, also writing down notes and using these sentence starters to frame our discussion. After the time of discussion, we moved on to a whole class discussion talking about the pros and cons of creating the bombs, with students coming up with the answers or list to each side. Then we transitioned this list into pros and cons of dropping the bomb, and how that would affect American lives and involvement in the war. After we finished this list, we then moved our desks to create a space for debate. We set up this debate as a Congress or a government body, and we role-played as though our class was deciding if we should drop the bombs or not. Each student had an argument for either for or against, with evidence to support that argument. After our debate was finished, we then, as a class, voted we either dropping the bombs or not to drop the bombs. When the voting was done, we then did a write-up of about 6 sentences saying their side, their argument, and then their points or evidence to support that argument. And then we also went over what did you vote for, and did you change your mind from the beginning. For students that were absent, we have a couple things to make up for those points. First thing is that you are going to interact with the National Geographic World War II in the Pacific timeline. This is what it looks like right here. You're just going to go through it, click on some of these major points down here, and you can slide through the time line and just kind of hit them, and tells them a little bit about what had happened, when it happened, things like that. Just kind of click through, read a little bit about it just to refresh your knowledge about the end of World War II. After that, you're going to go to our quiz, which can be found next to this video. You're going to start out by just putting your name at the top. We can just put Jane Doe right here with your period number. Let's just start with 2. And then you're going to answer the questions as you go through. There's only a couple questions, so answer fully with the ones that need a typed out answer. And then when you're done, you're just going to press submit. After this, you are going to go to your notebook and open up to a fresh new page. You're going to mark the top, makeup work. And then you are going to put the date in the corner. Then on the second line, you're going to draw a T-chart with pros on one side and cons on the other. You are then going to write about 3 points for each side, pros and cons for creating the atomic bomb. After making about 3 points, you're going to write another 3 points, but for the question, should they be used? So pros and cons for creating the atomic bomb, and then pros and cons for using the atomic bomb. When you are finished with that, you're going to go onto the back side of the paper and write makeup write-up at the top, also with the date in the corner. This write-up is going to be about 1 page, okay, and you're going to start it off with answering why the U.S. should drop the bomb and includes some evidence. Your next paragraph is going to be why the U.S. should not drop the bomb, and then also include evidence. And your last paragraph is going to be which side would you argue for, and did making the pros and cons list change your mind in any way? All of this is expected to be turned in by the next notebook check. Our next class is going to talk about the atomic bomb and how that gave power to certain nations and how they would use that power, and the nuclear arms race that would follow during the Cold War. If you have any questions, please contact me by emailing me or visiting me when you are at school, and have a good day.